Good morning, everyone. How are you? Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. So when Ada invited me to speak at MaD, I was incredibly flattered, of course. She runs one of the best conferences in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And she explained to me that MaD is for young people, for game changers, people who believe in change and believe that they have a role in making a difference in your own town, in your own city, in your own country, and in the world. So of course I accepted because I wanted to be a part of that conversation. I wanted to share the work that we do and any opportunity to work with Ada Wong you take. It took me a little while to realize that Ada didn't consider me a young person. I thought that I was coming here as a young person to share conversation. So that's been a little hard to get over, that y'all are young people and I'm not, but we're going to work on that. I think why that's hardest, actually, is because I remember school like it was yesterday. It wasn't, but it's close. So I heard Ada ask you this morning how many of you didn't like your schooling. So can you do that again? How many of you did not have a good experience in secondary school? How many of you are just not raising your hand because you don't want the person next to you to know, right? So I didn't like school either. We call it middle school and high school in the States. It's a bit different than just secondary altogether. But I did well in school, but I didn't like it. And what it sort of tended to bring out in me is some anger and some resistance to rules, right? So I always wanted change. I went to school, again, it was yesterday when I was in school, but I went to school at a time when, not very unlike now, where we sat in rows, we all did the exact same thing at the exact same time, and we moved at the exact same pace. We were told what to do, when to do it, and by whom. I didn't like that. It made me angry. And when I went to college, I found the exact same experience. I was told what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, and I just kept getting angry. I wanted change. I wanted a difference. So of course I went into education, right, sort of jab at them to say, we can actually make a difference, we can change, and this is something that I actually believe in. So I thought this morning what I would do is, after hearing the three speakers before me who were incredibly inspiring, and schools like that around the world, if we had more of them, we'd be a much, much better global country, as far continent, global continent, that's a mess. Globe, be a much better globe. So I thought what I would do for a few minutes is just depress you. So I thought if I depress you first, then we could talk about the inspirational part, and then it's sort of a nice curve, I hope. So I hail from New York City. How many of you have been to New York City? How many of you aspire to go to New York City? How many of you absolutely never want to step foot in New York City? Yeah, something like that, right? So I work in something called the I-Zone, which is an Office of Innovation within government. So I work for the public school system of New York City, and let's look at a little bit of what goes on. We have a bit of a scale problem in New York City. We operate our school system as one district, but that can be a bit misleading, because unlike most school districts around the country, ours is quite vast. We teach and educate over 1 million students. We have over 1,700 schools. We also educate what we call pre-kindergarten or pre-K, about 200,000 students as well in full pre-K. We speak over 140 languages. Our students hail from over 1,000 different cities and countries, and we have over 75,000 teachers. We operate the largest Wi-Fi network in the country. We have, other than the military, we feed and provide more meals every day than any other organization in the world. And so it's sort of a school district, but most school districts in the United States are 2 schools, 10 schools, 20 schools, and ours is just a little bit different. So what happens when you work in a government organization that large is that we tend to be bureaucracies. Education in general across the country tends to be a very hard type of government organization to change. People don't like change in government. We've been elected into these places. We spend a lot of money. We spend a lot of time. We put a lot of effort and interest into making things really, really complicated. And so in order to do anything different, we would have to sort of try and make things simpler and try to actually be flexible. And governments don't usually operate that way. So this is sort of what we often get when we try to bring about change in government. Doesn't really happen quite that well. So with these complications, we have things like this. So in public education, we have lots and lots and lots of rules. There's lots and lots and lots of rules in Hong Kong education and in all places across Asia and Europe as well. We have, in New York City alone, we have over 91 sort of policy sections that every school needs to abide by, that every family needs to understand, that every student needs to understand, that every school leader needs to understand. Of those different categories, we have a bunch of subcategories. Under those subcategories, we have some sub-subcategories. And so by the end of it, you have about 1,000 pages of really complicated rules that may or may not have anything to do with you, ever. And they might, but they're really generally complicated. They tend to look like this. Here's one, maybe. This is one. If you want to go to high school in New York City, you have to know this map, inside and out. And mind you, there's about 600 different high schools in New York City. So you need to understand this if you're a student. You need to understand it if you're a parent. You need to understand it if you're a principal. And you certainly probably wrote it if you're a policymaker, and you probably don't even understand it. We also have a lot of rules around companies who want to work in New York City. So again, when you have 1 million students and 1,700 schools, there's lots of companies who want to sell products and services and supports to your organization. So this is the roadmap for how you can actually get yourself in a situation where you can actually sell your services to New York City. It's really complicated and really daunting, and oftentimes just detracts people from wanting to have anything to do with us at all. We have similar maps around teacher certification, if people want to teach in New York City. How many of you want to be teachers? Lie to me at least. How many of you want to be, if everyone could raise your hand and say, how many of you want to go into education to make a difference? Can you, if your neighbor doesn't raise their hand, can you jet them on the shoulder so that they raise their hand? Excellent. Ada, will you take a picture of that? They all want to go into education to make a difference. Fantastic. So hopefully, we can sort of do things a little bit differently when you all join us in the ranks of education so that we aren't not interested in being part of it because we feel like it's too stagnant or it's too confined or it's sort of inflexible and doesn't allow us to change. It tends to make us feel like this, right? This is generally what tends to happen. And so when you put so much emphasis into policy and so much emphasis into rules and so much emphasis into centralization and standardization, you do that with a good intent, right? We want all kids to have a successful education. We want all teachers to be successful in education. We all want to be happy. Although someone told me the other day, I was at a meeting with some legislation in Hong Kong, and a gentleman told me that there's actually a sort of a Hong Kong culture that happiness shouldn't be something that you actually are expected to have. Am I getting that right? Isn't there's like a phrase, I don't remember what it is, but it's something about happiness isn't actually something that we should all strive to have. So I strive to be happy. I think students strive to be happy. Teachers strive to do a good job, and as do schools. But we can't treat all schools exactly the same in New York, in the nation, in any country around the world, because we're all different. We all have different needs. We all have different strengths, different motivations, different abilities, and different skills. But you all want to go into education, so you all have the same goal in mind, so that's good. But you might have different pathways that you want to get there. Until we do that, until we can start really changing the way we think about education and the way we think about schooling as a model and what it means to be in school, then we're going to have situations like this. Maybe. Right. In the United States, every 26 seconds, a student drops out of high school. We have in New York City alone, 1 out of every 3 children under the age of 17 lives in poverty. In the United States, almost 60% of our students graduate high school. That means that almost 40% don't. Of those 60% that go to college, almost half of them take at least a year of what we call remediation, or they take their first year of college requires them to take courses that they should have had in high school before they can actually start their university curriculum. And so that's a problem in a lot of ways, right? One, it's a problem of money. If you're paying for college, government doesn't subsidize education in all of the universities in New York or in the country. A lot of them are privatized. College is really expensive anywhere around the world. So if you go to college and you have to take remediation courses, you maybe can't afford to finish. Maybe you just feel really bad about yourself. And it's a real problem for the universities because they're frustrated because they didn't expect you to come not ready. So we have this thing in the United States that we call college and career readiness. And we try to work with schools across the country to prepare students for college and career. I think it's college and career and everything after. But we have this problem now. And until we change schools, we're going to continue to see this problem. Part of it stems from most of our schools, many of our schools, still operate as though it's 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Again, I went to school yesterday, but I'm guessing that my school probably didn't look that much different than the schools that you graduated from 5 or 10 years ago or even 3 years ago. Our social economy has changed. Global conversations have changed. The way businesses work have changed. But by and large, schools have not changed. Last night, I looked in the MaD brochure. I don't know if anybody noticed this yet, but on the back page, one of the back pages of the brochure, there was a statistic that said, I might get this wrong, but it's close. Something like 90% of the world's data has been calculated or collected in the last 2 years. Did anybody see that? Am I getting that right? Is that what it is? That's profound. Think about the way we communicate now. Think about the way that we live our lives, how socially connected we are with all of our devices, the way we get jobs, the way that we choose our food selection, our music selection, the way we walk down the street is incredibly different now. But then you walk into schools, and I say it's almost like a metaphorical language barrier because they often don't look any different than they did a long time ago. And as a result, we're failing more of our students. Are you depressed yet? Raise your hand if you're depressed yet. Awesome. Not that many of you are depressed. How many of you, so in the New York Times, there was a series of stories that were recently published called The Invisible Child. And The Invisible Child is the story of a girl named Asani who lives in New York City, who lives in a homeless shelter and was having a very, you could imagine, the invisible child, the name sort of says it all. But she's going through life, she's going through school, and many would argue invisible. Invisible to government to even know that she's there, perhaps invisible to her school, invisible to her community. And there's 22,000 people like Dasani in New York City, and there's over 2 million people like her in the United States. But we educate students who are homeless. In New York, we educate students who are incarcerated. We educate teen mothers. We educate students who are incredibly artistic and play music 6 hours a day or want to. We educate people who are early scientists. We educate dancers. We educate everybody in the world. Every youth in the world has a place in education, and it's government's responsibility to strive to personalize their school so that we're successful in giving every single one of them what they need. Okay, so now that you're depressed, I hope, let's move away from that. So about 3.5 years ago, New York City, which again is a gigantic bureaucracy, opened an incubation lab, or sort of an R&D lab, and I work there. I have the pleasure of working there. It's called the iZone. We stole the little I from, Apple, or maybe they stole it from us. We're still duking it out. Right. It'll be a long fight, I assure you. And it's called the iZone. And really what our charge is to change the game of education in New York City and scale those game changers, or those ideas for how things can be done differently, across the country and hopefully across the world. So what we do is we say we need to help think differently about what school means for students, what school means for students, and what we mean by education. And we know that we need to do it differently. And in order to do that, we need new ideas.